अभी से जागना जरूरी है। ये रेवड़ी कल्चर देश के विकास के लिए बहुत घातक है। इस रेवड़ी कल्चर से देश के लोगों को और खास करके मेरे युवाओं को बहुत सावधान रहने की जरूरत है।
Revdi culture or freebies has become a hot topic in the Indian political arena. Various issues surrounding the topic have cropped up: questions of welfarism and the welfare state. Politics aside, questions like what is welfare and do we really need a welfare state will be the focus of this video in the first part, and in the second we will try to look into the context and discuss about the Indian welfare provisions. What is welfarism? Welfarism is a principle that advocates that the social welfare or the welfare of the society depends upon the welfare of the individual. Welfarism is concerned with issues like meeting the basic needs, providing health and education services, housing facilities, among others. Welfare provisions thus ensure the well-being and the dignity of the people. Sociologist Pete Alcock identified four main sectors that help to meet such welfare needs. The first one is the informal sector, which includes family, neighbors, friends who assist people in times of need. The second is the voluntary sector, which consists organizations like old age homes, orphanages, which provide welfare services. The third is the private sector, which constitute the private companies providing welfare services in the exchange of monetary charges. Examples obviously are the private schools, hospitals. The last but not the least is the state sector or the welfare state, that involves the state or the government providing the welfare. What is a welfare state? How did it develop? Social historian Asa Briggs defined the welfare state as a state in which organized power is deliberately used in an effort to modify the play of the market forces. To him, the welfare state develops where the government decides that the population's essential needs and well-being will not be adequately provided for without government intervention. Thus, it is a concept of government in which the state plays a key role in the protection and the promotion of economic and social well-being of its citizens. Origins of the welfare state. Michael Hill summarized the origin of the modern welfare state in Western nations, particularly in Britain. Hill recounts that government welfare policy is as old as 16th and the 17th century. Before the 16th century, welfare was provided informally by family and friends with some interventions by the churches. In 1601, the Poor Law Act was introduced in England, which is seen as the first direct involvement of the state in welfare. Later centuries saw the growth of the state intervention, where state decided matters like working hours, hygiene, and cleanliness. This cleanliness led to the creation of local government structures, including municipal bodies. State support also included support for education, which began in the 19th century. State funded health provisions also slowly developed in the 19th century. However, Hill highlighted that despite these developments, the dominant view was still to keep the state's intervention in the welfare to the minimum. The dominant view supported voluntary and charitable provisions rather than state interventions. All of this changed with the onset of the 20th century. About the turn of the century, there was growing awareness of social problems, particularly the poverty. Also, new laws had strengthened the local government's abilities to provide such welfare services. This led to a growing belief that the existing system of helping the poor was inadequate, and the government brought many acts to provide welfare services. After the World War I, there was an expansion of the role of the state regarding welfare provisions, including pensions, tackling unemployment, etc. Despite these developments, state welfare provisions remained patchy because it had developed in a piecemeal manner. This, however, changed with the onset of the World War II. During the World War II, the government planning involved not just organizing the military effort, but also involved aspects of social policies such as food rationing, rent controls, price controls. The conduct of the war and the organization of social and economic policy by the state suggested that the state could effectively take on a wider role. The war also created a solidarity among the masses, which, along with the newfound confidence in the state planning, led to the expansion of the welfare activities of the government. The famous example is of the Beveridge Report in England, which was commissioned around 1940s. It suggested that the government should adopt a comprehensive policy of social progress that could include various social provisions like social insurance schemes, health services, and mind you that this suggestion of providing health services led to the launch of the National Health Service in Britain, famously known as the NHS. It also suggested affordable housing, employment services, providing education services. This led to the introduction of the universal and free state secondary education in Britain. While the basic task remain the same, the welfare state and its role varies in the modern society today. Anthony Giddens highlighted that the welfare services provided varies from country to country. This is partly because the policymakers and the academicians put forth conflicting views on what they think the role of the welfare should be. If I can take the example in the today's political arena, we can see the conflicting ideas of AAP and BJP on the Revdi culture. This has led to the development of the distinct perspectives on the welfare. The Marxist perspective. Marxist view of the welfare state reflects their ideological understanding of the state. They postulated that welfare on the surface appears to benefit the working class, but in the long term, it really helps to maintain capitalism instead. Also, according to them, it is merely a myth that the state redistributes the wealth from the rich to the poor. In reality, the welfare is carried out on the basis of the working class, which pays the taxes. Sociologist Norman Ginsburg highlighted the functions of the welfare state as follows. A real function is to manage capitalism, smooth out the problems of the booms and slums, and not to genuinely benefit the workers. Any benefit to the workers are unintended byproducts of the central purpose of managing the capitalism. Contain the resistance and the revolutionary potential of the working class. The social security benefits discourage the welfare class from striking or leaving their jobs. The welfare state helps maintaining a reserve army of labor by providing unemployment allowances to those who may be needed during the economic booms. Other strands in the Marxism provided different reasons for the existence of the welfare state. The welfare state has enabled the monitoring and control on the lives of the proletariats. Obviously, by providing many services, they keep a check on them. Further, the Marxists believe that the welfare state and its provisions are undemocratic, as the working class have little to no control over the welfare provisions meant for their own selves. A.R. Desai, criticizes the welfare state from a Marxist and a socialist point of view. He states that he would like the state to do more for its citizens than is being currently done by the Western welfare states. Western capitalist welfare states. Critics to the Marxist perspective contest this view and advocate that welfare has led to significant improvement for the working class. Welfare is mildly, if not completely, has redistributed. Welfare has mildly, if not completely, redistributed wealth, as better off pay higher taxes, higher rates of taxes due to the progressive taxation. True to some extent, but Marxists exaggerate the degree to which welfarism benefits capitalism. Next is the neoliberal perspective. The neoliberal perspective. This perspective argues for a freer, more open, and a competitive economy, and consequently, it is critical of the government intervention in the market system. The perspective is therefore critical of the welfare state for the following reasons. The economic consequences. The welfare state leads to an excessive tax burden on the private industry, undermines incentives to take risks. Innovation therefore takes a big step, resulting in expensive goods and services. Welfare state may also create a dependency culture. Those who claim welfare may ultimately lose ability to support themselves and become more and more dependent on states. Examples include little to no incentive to save for retirements. If I have to draw a parallel, we can draw a parallel between the NPS scheme versus the old pension scheme. James Bartholomew suggested that the benefit system creates hidden unemployment. The higher the welfare benefits are, the less are the incentives to work, and thus high rates of unemployment. This can also create a poverty trap. He also suggested that the welfarism creates psychological problems, where he highlighted how welfarism incentivizes frauds which create dishonest society marred with rising crimes. He gives example of people claiming welfare illegally. The news in Indian arena. PDS and ration card frauds in India are a great example suggesting this view. Welfare state has created a massive, inefficient and expensive bureaucracy. Our Prime Minister Modi was also critical of them. He Bartholomew states that to ask the state not to waste money or be less bureaucratic is asking to ask the state not to waste money or be less bureaucratic is like asking a zebra to give up its stripes. A welfare state creates unstable families. According to him, state benefit provisions for lone parents has made divorce and single parenthood an option. Also, the state pensions discourage people to work after an age. This reduces older people's contact with the rest of the society and makes them poorer both socially and financially. He also highlighted the failure of the welfare provisions in the healthcare sector, which according to him experiences shortage of infrastructure, human resources. Particularly, he gives an example of the National Health Service of Britain, where he highlights how NHS fails to make the good use of its resources because the state-run bureaucracy lacks the financial incentives to perform well. He also posits that the welfare provisions have resulted in the worsening of the overall education standard in the recent decades. State education has failed to reduce inequality, close the gap between the higher and the lower social classes. Highlighting all this, he argues that the voluntary welfare and organizations can be just as effective as the state. in meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. Also, without welfare state, people will be much more responsible. Political consequences. Neoliberals have put forward a public choice theory which states that politicians will tend to expand the ambit of the welfare state in order to be re-elected to their offices by making excessive promises. This is the Revdi culture that the PM Modi highlighted, and this has also pushed Sri Lanka into an economic turmoil. Neoliberals thus argue for a minimalist welfare state that intervenes in a bare minimum capacity to prevent extreme poverty and major social problems. This policy found its currency in the form of Thatcherism in Britain from 1980s to 1990s, where there were certain cuts and changes in the welfare system there. The next is the feminist perspective. The feminist perspective has represented the welfare state as an organized in the interest of men at the expense of women. The welfare state, according to them, has failed to provide adequate services for women, as the state is less effective in meeting women's needs than men's. However, such sweeping statements are bound to be negated, as some feminists themselves have argued that welfare state does not universally oppress women. The state today provides services such as the child care. Example is the India's Maternity Benefits Act, travel care, Delhi's free tickets, Kudumbashri schemes, and etc. While these were the critical views, other perspectives look welfare state with a different light. Critics to the neoliberal perspective have highlighted the shortcomings of the neoliberal scheme of policies, as they advocated that the state welfare spending is not all bad and it boosts final incomes of the poorest members of the society. Besides, the voluntary sector is unpredictable and sometimes exclusionary. Pete Alcock has highlighted that the virtue of the consumer choices that the neoliberals give prominence to is often misleading. He exemplifies that many parents, out of their choices, may not send their children to school. This can perpetuate class inequalities, and this is not at all a welfare choice. A major influence in the virtue of the welfare state was highlighted by T.H. Marshall. He argued that the development of the welfare state involved the progressive development of the citizenship rights. The evolution of the welfare states has been a major factor in promoting and protecting democratic citizenship. What he meant is that with the evolution of the state, citizens gain different types of rights, civil, political, and social. He argued rights are based on egalitarian terms. They assume a degree of equality. Thus, the welfare state is a great way to reduce inequality present in the society. In short, welfarism, according to him, protects citizenship as well as reduces inequality. Another proponent of this social democratic view regarding welfarism was Richard Titmuss. He advocated that welfare state could promote altruism and social integration by bringing a shared sense of citizenship among the members of the society. Evidently, no government in the advanced as well as the emerging economies has completely abolished social welfare. However, some countries have moved or are moving towards a more liberal stand where welfare provisions are being moved away from the state sector into the private or the voluntary sector, even if financed by the state. Example, in Britain, several state services including NHS have been opened up to competition from the private sector. India too has seen many schemes like Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, the UPI, labor codes, where the private sector also has an important part to play. Apart from this binary of welfarism and no welfarism, a third way has been advocated by Anthony Giddens and Tony Blair. This approach emphasizes the promotion of equality of opportunity. For this, they see state intervention as being very important. They highlight that rather than providing doles based upon passive welfare, what a society should adopt is active welfare, where citizens are not dependent upon the state for their welfare. Rather, they are enabled to actively help themselves to get out of the welfare dependency. State should actively work with the voluntary and the private sectors to tackle exclusion and expand opportunities. While this was more or less the sociology surrounding welfarism, this part of the video will focus on particular cases of India and its states. The Wikipedia page narrates the welfare state under Ashoka in the ancient India. Emperor Ashok of India put forward his idea of the welfare state in the 3rd century BCE. He envisioned his dharma as not just a collection of high sounding phrases, he consciously tried to adopt it as a matter of the state policy. The propagation of dharma included many measures of people's welfare. All of this changed with the onset of the British. In India, the concept of modern states find its roots after the British colonized India. However, all of this changed with the coming of the British. In India, the concept of the modern state finds its roots after the British colonized India. However, the British rule was not very interested in protecting and promoting the welfare of the people. Whatever it did was in keeping with the interest of the British colonial government and not in the interest of the people of India. When India attained independence, it had innumerable problems and challenges. The social and the economic inequality was all pervasive. Economically, Indian situation was very miserable. Socially also, India was having a number of problems. There were social inequalities, and all vulnerable sections of the society, such as women, Dalit, were deprived of the basic means of living. The constitution makers decided that India would be a welfare state. Accordingly, constitution has extensive provisions to ensure social and economic welfare of the people of India. In this regard, two specific provisions have been made, one in the form of fundamental rights and other as the directive principles of the state policy. Minimizing the disparities, inequality, and ensuring welfare of its citizenry has been the foremost agenda of India after independence. For this, a multi-pronged strategy was used, which included wage employment, land reforms, direct target programs, growth-led trickle-down approach, cooperative movements, Panchayati Raj and urban local bodies, green revolution, poverty alleviation programs such as Garibi Hatao, among others. Even today, India has a multitude of welfare provisions in different aspects, including Mudra scheme for financial loans, Manrega for employment, Skill India Mission for skilling, Ayushman Bharat PMJ for healthcare, midday meals and free education, subsidies regime including fertilizers, power subsidies, etc. Now back to the issue that we started with the video with. Now back to the issue that we started the video with. Are the various provisions that India has undertaken or promises to do so are welfare or just freebies? The chairman of the 15th Finance Commission of India, N.K. Singh, has defined a freebie as something that is given to you without having to pay for them, especially as a way of attracting your support for or interest in something. It tries to explain the distinction between welfare and freebie in the sense that the welfare provisions are intentionally apolitical, while the freebies are intentionally political and are announced to garner support from beneficiaries, generally in the form of votes. However, it is still difficult to identify and explain freebies and detangle it from the various forms of welfarism. The fact is that the different sections of the society require different kinds of support. Moreover, states are at varying levels of economic development. What may be deemed as necessary state support for a population in one state may not be seen in the same way as in the another state. In the recent debate surrounding the Revdi culture, several arms of the Indian polity also have expressed concern over the culture of freebies. RBI in its report has linked precarious state of the state finances to the freebies, particularly the power subsidies. Supreme Court has recently recommended the creation of an expert body to examine the matter surrounding the freebies. In conclusion, the determination of what is a good or a bad freebie will always be a political choice. In a democracy, political choices must be questioned, and in that spirit, a debate on the merits and the demerits of the freebies is very important. There should be a constructive debate, keeping our political and socio-economic there should be a constructive debate keeping our political and social economic context in mind, and the result must be towards building a welfare state that invests in human capital. It lies in building a renewed democratic consensus on our growth path that recognizes the fact that welfarism is about empowering vulnerable livelihoods. That was the video. That was the video, guys. To know more on merits and demerits of freebies, please go through various articles and videos. Thank you.